Now, for all of those who came this morning hoping to hear about death and resurrection, I'm afraid that the next few minutes are just going to disappoint. Because I'm not going to do death and resurrection because it just falls so far outside of my own theology that I would have real trouble preaching on it with any kind of ownership, with any kind of authenticity. For me to preach on the resurrection of Jesus would feel kind of like I was borrowing from someone else's tradition, because I would be. It's not my tradition, and without permission, it would actually be kind of appropriative. Okay? Yes, there are many Unitarians and Universalists who do follow the teachings of Rabbi Jesus. But for the most part, that's what they do. They follow the teachings. And they don't necessarily pay as much attention to all of the elaborate stories and gymnastics and institutions that his followers created. Unitarian Christians find more life and hope in the life of Jesus rather than in the death of Jesus. This is why in the Unitarian churches in Transylvania, you don't find crosses. You find flowers and birds. This is why if you go to Arlington Street Church in Boston, you'll find amazing Tiffany windows, all about the life of Jesus, but not about the death or resurrection, because that's not where we go. And for me, a theology that places a higher value on death and resurrection, in my perspective, it's heading in a really strange direction, away from what Jesus actually taught. I'm trying to keep my focus on what he taught, because I believe that's what can change the world for the living, right? In my perspective, a religion that values and valorizes death and suffering is a religion that glorifies and supports violence. That's what I was asking Selden, saying, why are so many people dying? I said, I know, it's like it's their religion or something. Okay, enough said. Next topic. Yeah. The following message is meant for entertainment purposes only. It is not to be taken as a substitute for scientific inquiry, scientific, medical, or legal advice. I will jest and I will jape and I will spin the mysteries of the universe and I will make a fool of myself for your entertainment and perhaps your enlightenment. Let's just see. A fool is a person with very little actual power who manages to challenge all of the social norms by transgressing or flipping them up. This is the person who, with, bells on their toes and a silly little giggle, can say outrageous things. Things that would always outrage. But the way they say it prompts laughter. And then done well, that laughter causes cracks. Cracks where the wisdom or humility or sometimes even courage can seep in. Now, there are many kinds of fools. There are the wise fools, the holy fools, the nonsensical fools who make us all question sanity, and then there are the magnificently simple fools who bumble along, foolishly presuming that all will be well, and all will be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Me? I'm a fool for answering the call to ministry. Besotted with the grandeur of the all that is, I came to love our odd way of being religious. And I saw that my work, my calling, was to be with my people. This was such a foolish decision. It put me in debt. It uprooted me, and it tore away from me any last final shreds of certainty that I might have been clutching to. And the punchline to this whole joke is that I don't get to spend anywhere near as much time dancing with the universe anymore because I'm so busy having to talk about it. What kind of fool are you? What kind of fool do you aspire to be? There's the wise fool. It's a role. The wise fool is as old as the role of the power-blinded king, right? The king holds the power, and the fool points out that the king is no better than anyone else. And ultimately, we see that it is a wise king that keeps a wise fool around at all times, right? Okay. We remember the fool in Shakespeare's King Lear, the fool who chides and yet protects the raging, mad king while he destroys everything around him. The fool is the only one who will speak truth to him. In our modern era, it is still the wise person who keeps a fool nearby. When he was a young boxer, Mike Tyson used to pay a person to follow him around, a hype man, shouting out how great he was, how strong he was, how undefeatable he was. The hype man became popular. It's still used in hip-hop. There's a hype man behind the singer, right? The sycophant, the shouter, the person who unashamedly promotes the greatness of the great. In contrast, Muhammad Ali's cornerman, Bundini Brown, he would shout out those memorable phrases, floats like a butterfly, stings like a bee. He would talk about Ali's greatness, but person to person, he would pull Ali right back down. Ali kept him close because Brown was his comedic partner, but he was a fool's fool. He was a check on his power. He kept him grounded. And Brown cried real tears when Ali was defeated. In later years, as Mike Tyson matured, he looked back on that practice of keeping the yes men around and realized he had been a fool for not having somebody who would tell him the truth. That's so essential when we are so strong. And now here we are. We have a man acting as if he was king, who is his own hype man. Shouting about his own greatness, his own strength, his own unbridled, unchecked power. He's his own fool. And he will not accept anyone else to be his fool. He will tolerate no others telling him the truth. His tragic fragility, his narcissistic bravado, all this would be pathetic if it weren't so terrifying. No wonder we're confused, right? We have a transgressor for king. And the only stories we have, our only inheritance for this situation, reminds us tragedy awaits. Perhaps it's time for us all to turn fool. The wise fool points out the distance between what is and what could be, and the heart breaks across this chasm. What about the holy fools? The holy fools are as old as faith itself. The holy fools point out the hypocrisy of those who would trim their faith to fit social norms. They remind us that we're fools to remain trapped in our illusions. The holy fools call us back again and again to love. They call us back again and again to the now. The Buddha was a fool to observe that even low-born people could achieve enlightenment. Jesus was a fool to tell other Jews to love past their laws. He was a fool to tell the Romans that love was stronger than money or power. That kind of foolishness will still get you killed. The holy fools point out the distance between what is and what should be. And the heart changes when that chasm is shown to be just a crack. And the witlessly cheerful fools. They cannot help themselves. No fool can really help themselves, but the witlessly cheerful fools are the happiest ones. I aspire to be a witlessly cheerful fool. It comes easy sometimes. Oh, but then there are their cousins, the willfully cheerful fools. The willfully cheerful fools are the ones to keep an eye on, because these are the fools who know that the world is full of pain and poop and cruelty, and yet they refuse to succumb to cynicism or despair. These are the fools who can look evil in the eye and point out there's a booger hanging out of its nose. Perhaps the willfully cheerful fools are the bravest fools of all. The cheerful fools point out what is, and what is, and what is. And in that momentary distraction from fear, the heart melts into the all that is. Yeah. Okay, in the Islamic folk tradition, Nasruddin is both a holy fool and a wise fool and a cheerful fool. He's studied, he's wise, he gives advice, but his wisdom is the advice that always comes out sideways. Not pious or goopy, but unexpectedly and breathtaking in its simplicity. He recommends, he tells the gardener to learn to love dandelions if you can't grow roses. He stuffs fancy dinner food into the pockets and smears pudding on his coat to remind the hosts to welcome the person, not the clothing. He brings these simple eyes to our complex world, and he inverts social norms and human failings with this gaze of simplicity. In the Jewish folk tradition, there's the fictional town of Helm. I'm not pronouncing it right. Helm, where all of the villagers are foolish together. And as is very common in Jewish humor, it's very self-reflexive critique. Oh, the people of Helm were worriers. They worried about everything. Would there be enough money? Would there be enough food? Would it rain on Tuesday? They were consumed with worrying. A meeting was held. What should we do about this worrying? They thought, and a motion was made, promptly seconded. They all decided. Yossel, the cobbler, would be retained by the community to do all of their worrying for them. Yes. And for this, he would be paid 1 ruble a week. Yes. And the motion was all set to carry. All the speeches had been made in favor of this decision, and one sage rises up with the fatal question. If Yusel earned 1 ruble a week, what would he have to worry about? Okay. All right, now, some of us might have noticed that there is a common thread going through all of this. all of these fools are men or male or masculine. What's up with that? Yes, there are plenty of foolish female protagonists in literature and folktales, but there's not as many. And here's why. In a world with a theology that upholds power rather than creation, remember, women are real good at creating, but we're not as physically powerful. Okay, so in a world with that kind of theology, women are going to be afforded less power, less authority. They are, simply by their not being male, less than. They're seen as unequal, and foolishness is kind of their natural state in this presumption, okay? So wisdom's not even expected of them. So where's the punchline? And then any woman who should speak truth to power, however foolishly, is going to get called a witch. And that's another sermon. Okay, back to fools. Considering our current situation, that's what I'm calling it. The mess that is our politics and the racism and the misogyny and the environmental degradation, our current situation. Considering our current situation, yes, we will need calm. We will need reason. We will need science and logic. But because we're dealing with a transgressor, simply pointing out that he's transgressing again is not really going to make any difference. It's not going to disrupt the pattern, right? He's transgressing again. He's a transgressor. Simply pointing out again and again that things are in a state is not going to disrupt the pattern. So, with our love to secure us and our friends to keep us company, it might be time for some completely foolish displays of courage and cheerfulness, willful cheerfulness. Maybe it's time to use the power of the absurd to invert and subvert the power of money. Greed. I was thinking about those really courageous students at the University of Texas about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Do you remember them? Mostly women. Who they were protesting the laws that were permitting concealed carry on university campuses, on college campuses. They just said this. But here's how they responded. Here's how they protested. By strapping sex toys onto their backpacks. They reasoned that if another student could carry a Glock, they were free to carry a... There were rubber representations of male anatomy just swinging all around campus in a magnificently foolish and absurd display. And the media kind of had trouble trying to report on this one. News at 11. Not front page. That's what I mean by foolishness, absurdity, disruption, pointing out, calling truth to power, reminding us of what is. How will you respond to tyranny that threatens the inherent worth and dignity of each person? How will you participate in the democratic process when your voice is always in the minority? How will you point out the distance between what is and what must be for us to survive and thrive? What kind of fool will you be for love? That's our work.